Wendell was 37 years old, worked as a custodian at a Charlotte elementary school, and made exactly $34,780 a year before taxes. At 5:14 a.m., on a Tuesday morning in late September, he stood in the doorway of the life he thought he had. And all he heard was the sound of his own breathing. The air in the duplex was cold, unnaturally so, carrying a hollow echo that didn't belong. He had just finished a double shift, covering for a colleague whose kid was sick, and all he had thought about for the last 16 hours was the softness of his bed and the quiet comfort of his home. But the home was gone. His key had turned in the lock, as it always did, but the door swung inward with a weightless ease that was the first sign of wrongness. He pushed it open and stopped dead. The entryway was a void. The small $150 console table he'd built from reclaimed oak, where they always dropped their keys and mail, was gone. The $80 mirror that hung above it, a simple piece from Target they'd bought together years ago, was also gone. The wall behind it was naked, showing the faint outline of the mirror's frame and the single nail hole, a tiny, dark wound. He stepped inside, his worn $65 work boots making a sound on the hardwood floors that was too loud, too sharp. The living room to his left was a cavern of emptiness. The sofa, a comfortable gray sectional that had cost them $1,800 on a holiday sale, was gone. The coffee table, another of his own creations, a solid block of walnut with intricate joinery that had taken him 60 hours to perfect, was gone. The television, Claudette's prized 65-inch Samsung Smart TV, a $1,200 expense she had insisted on, was gone, along with the stand it sat on. Even the cheap $40 rug from IKEA had been rolled up and taken. He walked through the space, his mind refusing to process the information his eyes were feeding it. It felt like a dream, the slow, syrupy kind where you can't run. He turned, looking toward the corner by the window, his breath hitched in his chest, a sharp, painful gasp. That was where his mother's rocker had been. It was the only thing he had left of her, a simple, sturdy piece of cherry wood she had rocked him in as a baby. He'd just refinished it last year, spending weeks sanding it down by hand, rubbing in the oil until the wood glowed with a warm, inner light. It was priceless to him, and it was gone. A single piece of paper sat on the kitchen counter, the only object in the entire downstairs area. It was a plain white envelope, stark against the polished granite countertop they'd had installed for $4,200 2 years ago. Claudette's idea. His name, Wendell, was written on it in her neat, precise cursive. For a moment he thought it was a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank. But the silence in the house was too profound, too final for a prank. This was an erasure. He felt a cold dread wash over him, a physical sensation that started in his stomach and spread through his limbs, making his hands tremble. He was a man standing in the ghost of his own life. What does a person do when they come home to find their entire world has been packed up and stolen in the dead of night? This question hung in the vast, empty space where his life used to be, and Wendell had no answer. He didn't reach for the envelope. He couldn't. Instead, he slowly, methodically, walked through the rest of the house. The dining area was empty. The kitchen, aside from the built-in appliances, was stripped bare. No coffee maker, no toaster, no microwave. Even the knife block was gone. Upstairs, the bedroom was the same. The queen-sized bed with its $2,500 mattress was gone. The dressers, both his and hers, were gone. The closet door stood ajar, revealing a row of empty hangers. She had left him nothing. No, that wasn't true. She had left him his clothes, piled in a heap on the floor in the center of the room. A final, contemptuous gesture, and she had left the envelope. The facade of their life had been solid, at least to him. They lived in a modest duplex on the west side of Charlotte, a neighborhood of hard-working families and quiet streets. They had been married for 8 years. To an outsider, they were a normal, happy couple. Wendell worked his steady job, and Claudette was a paralegal at a growing firm uptown, earning a respectable $65,000. But beneath the surface of domestic normalcy, a crack had been forming, a hairline fracture that Wendell, in his quiet focus, had failed to see was becoming a chasm. He remembered a Saturday morning about a year ago. He was in the small garage he'd converted into a workshop, the air thick with the sweet, clean scent of cedar. He was working on a set of bookshelves for a client, a doctor, who lived in Myers Park and paid him a handsome $4,000 for the custom piece. His hands, calloused but gentle, moved with a familiar grace over the wood. This was his sanctuary, the place where the noise of the world faded, and all that mattered was the line, the grain, the join. Claudette had appeared in the doorway, holding her $1,200 iPhone 13 Pro. She wasn't looking at him, but at the phone's screen. She wore a silk robe he knew had cost $350. "I don't understand why you spend so much time out here," she said, her voice flat, breathing in all this dust. He'd smiled, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. "It's not dust, baby. It's potential. This is going to be a library wall." He gestured to the planks of wood. He was proud of his work. It was more than a hobby. It was an art, a lineage. His grandfather had been a carpenter, and his father, though he'd worked in a factory, could fix or build anything. The skill was in his blood. Right. "A library wall," she'd said, finally looking up from her phone. Her eyes scanned the organized chaos of his workshop, the gleaming hand planes arranged on the wall, the powerful table saw that had been his one big splurge at $2,200, the stacks of carefully selected lumber. Her expression wasn't one of interest or admiration. It was one of dismissal. "Renee and I were looking at listings. Did you know you can get a condo in South Park, a new build, for around $680,000? It has a pool, a gym, a concierge." He'd stopped sanding. $680,000, Claudette? On my $34,000 and you're 65? What bank do you think is signing off on that? It's about ambition, Wendell. It's about seeing the life you want and going for it, not this. She gestured vaguely at his workshop, at the very core of his being. "This is a hobby. It's cute. But it doesn't get us a condo in South Park." The word cute landed like a small, sharp stone in his chest. He'd spent years honing his craft, studying designs, mastering techniques. He had a waiting list of clients who paid thousands for his work, money that went directly into their joint savings account. The same account she was now using to dream of a life he was apparently holding her back from. The scene started to replay in his mind, now tinged with the bitter knowledge of the empty house. There was the dinner with her sister, Renee, a few months back. Renee was Claudette's older sister, sharper, colder, and even more ambitious. They'd gone to a trendy restaurant in South End, one where the appetizers cost more than Wendell earned in a day. He'd worn his best shirt and a pair of slacks, feeling out of place beside Claudette in her new $900 dress and Renee in a crisp power suit that probably cost double that. "The firm is hinting at a junior partnership track for me," Claudette had announced over their $18 cocktails. "That's amazing, baby," Wendell had said, genuinely happy for her. Renee had offered a thin smile. "It's a start, but you have to have the whole package, Claudette. The right address, the right car, the right social circle. You can't be a junior partner living in a duplex on the west side." Her eyes had flickered to Wendell for a fraction of a second, but it was long enough. The message was clear. He was part of the wrong package. Later that week, the fight over the Burberry dress happened. He'd come home to find a sleek, tan box on their bed. Inside was a trench coat. He'd seen it in a magazine Claudette had left open. The price tag, which she'd carelessly tossed in the trash, read $2,400. "You bought this?" he'd asked, holding the tag. "I got a bonus," she said defensively, not looking at him. "I deserved a little something." "A little something?" "Claudette, this is more than I make in a month. We're supposed to be saving. I was going to buy that new lathe, the one we talked about. It would let me take on bigger commissions." She had finally turned to face him, her eyes hard. "A lathe?" "Wendell, listen to yourself. You're talking about a tool for your little wood hobby, and I'm talking about building a career, a life. What is a lathe going to get us? More sawdust? Splinters and sawdust don't pay for a BMW, Wendell. They don't get us out of this neighborhood. The money from my hobby paid for the down payment on this house," he'd said, his voice quiet but firm. "It paid for your car. It paid for that granite countertop you had to have." "It's not enough," she'd whispered, and for the first time, he saw the raw, unhappy truth in her eyes. It's never going to be enough. The final argument, the one that must have precipitated the great emptying, had been just 3 days ago. He'd just gotten a call from a gallery owner in the Arts District who wanted to feature 3 of his pieces: a rocking chair, a credenza, and a dining table. It was a huge step, moving from commissions to gallery representation. He was ecstatic. He told Claudette the news as she was getting ready to go out with Renee. She was applying her makeup with intense concentration in their bathroom mirror. "That's nice, Wendell," she'd said, her voice distracted. "Nice? It's incredible. This could be the start of something big. I could finally quit the school, do this full time." She had put down her mascara, a $45 tube from Dior, and turned to him. The look on her face was one of pity. "Oh, honey, let's be realistic. It's a sweet little dream, and I'm happy you have something you're passionate about. But it's not a career. It's not real money. It's furniture." "It is real money," he'd insisted. "The pieces I have on consignment right now are worth over $20,000. She had laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound that cut him deeper than any insult. "Consignment isn't cash in the bank, it's a hope. I'm talking about reality. My reality." She had picked up her purse, a $1,500 Louis Vuitton she'd bought on a payment plan. "You can keep your little wood hobby, Wendell. Renee and I are going to go look at what's real." She had kissed him on the cheek. It felt cold, a meaningless gesture. "Don't wait up." He hadn't waited up. He'd gone to his workshop, the place that had always brought him peace, but the sting of her words followed him. He'd run his hand over the smooth, curved arm of his mother's rocker, feeling the history in the wood. He had no idea that in less than 72 hours, it would be gone, and the woman he'd built a life with would be the one to take it. He had no idea what was coming. The betrayal wasn't just in the taking, it was in the method. It was in the calculated cruelty of the erasure. After walking through the empty shell of his home, Wendell finally went outside. The morning sun just beginning to peek over the rooftops, casting long, lonely shadows. His next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retired postal worker in his late 60s, was out watering his prize-winning roses. "Morning, Wendell," Mr. Henderson called out, his voice a familiar, gravelly comfort. "You're home early." "Morning, Mr. Henderson," Wendell replied, his own voice sounding foreign and strained. "Just got off a double." Mr. Henderson squinted at him, then at the house. "Everything all right, son? Your place looks quiet." Wendell just shook his head, the words unable to form. A lump was lodged in his throat, thick with grief and confusion. The old man's friendly expression faded, replaced by one of concern. He set down his $30 watering can. "Claudette left, didn't she? I had a feeling. Saw the truck this morning. Woke me up." Wendell's head snapped up. "A truck?" "Yeah, big one. Not a moving company I recognized. Came around 6. I thought it was awful early to be making such a racket." He paused, looking uncomfortable. Her sister was with her. They were directing things. The image solidified in Wendell's mind. Claudette and Renee, a team, orchestrating his dispossession in the pre-dawn darkness. Did you see what they were taking?" Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "Looked like everything, son. I'm sorry. I saw them carry out that beautiful rocking chair of yours. The one you told me was your mother's. That was the last thing on the truck. Seemed a shame." He shook his head. "You know, my new doorbell camera probably caught the whole thing. The one my daughter got me for Christmas, a Ring doorbell, cost her $199. It records motion. You want to take a look?" It was the question Wendell had been dreading and needing to hear all at once. "Yes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I think I do." 5 minutes later, he was standing in Mr. Henderson's cozy living room, staring at a tablet. The room smelled of cinnamon and old books. It was the complete opposite of his own hollowed-out home. Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, had already queued up the footage. The screen showed a grainy, black-and-white view of their shared driveway. The timestamp in the corner read 6:02 a.m. A large, unmarked box truck was backed up to Wendell's side of the duplex. The figures of 2 men, hired muscle, were moving back and forth from the house to the truck. And there, standing by the front door, illuminated by the porch light, were Claudette and Renee. Claudette was pointing, directing, her posture rigid and determined. Renee stood beside her, arms crossed, nodding, a co-conspirator. Wendell felt a fresh wave of nausea. He watched them oversee the gutting of his life. He saw the ghostly shapes of his furniture being carried out. The sofa, the lamps, the boxes he could only assume were filled with their kitchenware, their photos, their memories. Then he saw one of the men emerge from the garage, his workshop. The man was carrying his table saw. It took 2 of them to lift it into the truck. Next came his planers, his sanders, his cherished collection of hand tools, all tossed into the back of the truck like scrap metal. An estimated $15,000 worth of equipment, the tools of his trade, his future, gone in an instant. He fast-forwarded, his finger trembling on the screen. He saw them carry out the walnut coffee table. He saw them carrying boxes from his workshop, likely filled with the wood he'd been saving, the pieces he had on consignment for the gallery. They were worth, at a conservative estimate, over $22,000. He watched as they stripped his identity piece by piece. Then came the final, soul-crushing moment. The timestamp read 6:47 a.m. The truck was nearly full. One of the movers came out of the house, carefully carrying his mother's rocking chair. It looked small and vulnerable in his grasp. For a second, Wendell's heart leaped with a foolish hope that they were setting it aside, that she wouldn't take that, couldn't take that. But Claudette simply pointed to the back of the truck. The man nodded, and with a final grunt, heaved the rocker into the dark maw of the truck. It landed with a visible jolt. Wendell flinched as if he had been struck. That was it. That was the final act of cruelty. It wasn't about the assets, it was about annihilation. She hadn't just left him. She had tried to unmake him. Mr. Henderson put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Son, I can save this for you. Put it on a thumb drive." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Wendell said, his voice thick. "Thank you." He walked back to his empty house, the grainy image of his mother's rocker being swallowed by the truck burned into his retinas. He finally walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the envelope. His hands were steady now. The trembling had been replaced by a cold, quiet calm. The shock had burned away, leaving behind the hard, unyielding core of his resolve. He didn't open it, not yet. He had no idea what was inside, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had made a critical mistake. She thought she had taken everything of value. She was wrong. The first step in playing dumb is to control your voice. Wendell sat on the top step of the staircase in his empty house, the only place to sit, and dialed Claudette's number. He let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Composing himself, forcing the rage down, packing it into a tight, dense ball in his stomach. He needed to sound confused, not angry, hurt, not vengeful. She answered on the 5th ring. "Hello?" Her voice was clipped, businesslike. "Claudette, it's me." A pause. "Wendell, I was wondering when you'd call." I just got home," he said, letting a tremor of confusion enter his voice. It wasn't hard to fake. The house is empty. What happened? Did we get robbed? He heard a sigh on the other end of the line. A sound of pure exasperation. It was the sound she made when he'd tracked sawdust into the house, or forgotten to take out the recycling. "No, Wendell, we didn't get robbed. I left. I moved out." "Moved out? With everything? You took everything, Claudette. My mother's rocker?" His voice broke on the last few words, and this time the pain was real. "I took what was ours," she said, her voice hardening. "They're marital assets. I had them put in storage. My lawyer will be in touch. There's an envelope for you on the counter." "Storage? What about my tools? The pieces for the gallery?" "I dealt with it," she said dismissively. "Honestly, Wendell, it's for the best. You need to let go of that little hobby and focus on reality. I did you a favor." A favor. The word hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. She had done him a favor by destroying his livelihood and desecrating the memory of his mother. The rage in his stomach pulsed, but he kept his voice even. "A favor?" he repeated quietly. "Okay, Claudette. Okay. I have to go," she said quickly. "I'm busy. Just wait for the papers from my lawyer. It will all be very straightforward." The line went dead. Straightforward. She thought this would be straightforward. He looked at the envelope in his hand. He still hadn't opened it. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he shouldn't. Not yet. Her final words, "I dealt with it," echoed in his mind. What did that mean? Storage didn't feel right. The cruelty was too specific. It felt more permanent than storage. His next call was to the gallery owner, a woman named Ms. Albright. He explained the situation, his voice heavy with apology. "The pieces are gone. I'm so sorry." To his surprise, she was understanding. "Wendell, don't you worry about that right now. Are you okay?" But then her voice turned practical. "For insurance purposes, I'll need to know what happened to them. Do you have a police report?" "I don't think they were stolen in that way," he said carefully. "My wife? She says she dealt with them?" "Well, you need to find out what that means. Those pieces were valued at a combined $22,500. If they've been sold, you're owed that money. If they've been destroyed or disposed of, that's a different legal matter entirely." Disposed of? The phrase hit him like a physical blow. He thought of the way the movers had handled his mother's rocker. He thought of Claudette's dismissive tone. He spent the next hour making calls. He started with storage units near their duplex, then expanded his search outward. No unit had been rented in his name, her name, or her sister's name in the last week. The lie about storage was unraveling. His mind kept snagging on her phrase. "I did you a favor." How would she see it as a favor? By removing the distraction? By forcing him to, what? Get a second job? Focus on being a custodian? The logic was twisted, cruel, and deeply condescending. And then, a horrible thought occurred to him. The most efficient way to deal with things you consider worthless is to give them away. He got in his 2012 Toyota Camry, a car with 187,000 miles on it that was paid in full, and drove to the Goodwill Donation Center on South Boulevard, the one closest to their duplex. He walked into the large, warehouse-like building, the air smelling of dust and discarded histories. He approached the counter where a bored-looking teenager was sorting through a bin of old T-shirts. "Excuse me," Wendell said. "I have a strange question. My wife might have dropped off a large donation in the last day or two. Her name is Claudette Miller. Is there any way to check?" The teenager sighed, clearly annoyed. "We get hundreds of donations a day." "I know," Wendell persisted, keeping his voice calm and polite. "But this would have been a big one. A truckload. Furniture, tools, things like that. It would have happened early, yesterday morning." The mention of a truckload seemed to pique the interest of an older woman who was working at a computer behind the counter. "A truckload, you say? Yesterday morning?" she asked, peering at him over her glasses. "Yes, ma'am, around 7 a.m. She clicked a few keys on her keyboard. "Name Claudette Miller?" "Yes, ma'am." She squinted at the screen. "Yep, got it right here. Donation receipt number 78-B4. A full truck. She valued the contents at $200 for tax purposes. $200. For his entire life's work. For his mother's memory. The number was so absurd, so insulting, it was almost comical. The cold calm settled over him again, thicker than before. This was not the act of a woman putting things in storage. This was the act of a woman trying to erase a man by declaring his passions, his history, and his livelihood as literal junk. "Is there any way," Wendell asked, his voice impossibly steady, "that I could get a copy of that receipt? For my records." The woman looked at him with a glimmer of sympathy in her eyes. She saw his tired face, his worn work clothes, the deep pain he was trying so hard to conceal. "I'm not really supposed to," she said, her voice dropping, "but the printer's right here and sometimes my finger just slips." A minute later, he walked out of the Goodwill, the morning sun glinting off the cars in the parking lot. In his hand, he held a flimsy piece of paper, a receipt. On it was a list of categories: furniture, household goods, tools, and at the bottom, a declared value of $200, next to the neat, familiar signature of his wife, Claudette. He now had two pieces of paper, the unopened envelope and a receipt that was a confession. The office of Ms. Devers was on the third floor of a modest brick building in Plaza Midwood, a world away from the gleaming glass towers of uptown Charlotte where Claudette worked. The space was filled with overflowing bookshelves, thriving potted plants, and the warm afternoon sunlight. Ms. Devers herself was a sharp, stylish black woman in her 40s, with a halo of intricate braids and eyes that missed nothing. Wendell had found her through a recommendation from a teacher at his school. "She's a fighter," the teacher had said, "and she's fair." Wendell sat in a comfortable but worn armchair, his $89 Timex watch a stark contrast to the expensive-looking mahogany desk. He had spent the last 2 days sleeping on an air mattress he'd bought for $75 at Walmart, in the cavernous silence of his empty house. He had showered, put on his nicest clothes, a clean polo shirt and pressed khakis, and placed his evidence on her desk. "So, let me make sure I have this straight, Mr. Miller," Ms. Devers said, her voice a calm, reassuring contralto. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, and her pen moved with quick, efficient strokes. "You came home from work to find your house completely emptied. Your wife, Claudette, admits to taking the items. She told you they were in storage, but you have reason to believe she disposed of them. Yes, ma'am, Wendell said. He pushed the goodwill receipt across the desk. She donated everything. Ms. Devers picked up the receipt. Her eyes scanned it, and a single perfectly shaped eyebrow rose. She declared the value of an entire house full of furniture, plus your professional tools and art pieces, at $200? Yes, ma'am. And you have evidence of what was taken? Wendell nodded and pushed a small black USB drive across the desk. My neighbor's doorbell camera. It shows the truck. It shows her and her sister directing the movers. And it shows them loading my mother's rocking chair last. Ms. Devers took the drive without a word and inserted it into her laptop. For a few minutes, the only sound in the office was the quiet click of her keyboard as she watched the grainy footage. Wendell didn't watch. He couldn't bear to see it again. He focused on a large fern in the corner, its green fronds reaching for the light. When she was done, she closed the laptop and looked at him, her expression serious. This is what we lawyers call dissipation of marital assets in bad faith. It's a nasty, foolish thing to do in a divorce, and judges do not look kindly on it. She made another note. Now about these tools and furniture. You say they had significant value? Yes, ma'am. He handed her a folder. Inside were photographs of the pieces he had created, along with copies of receipts for the commissions he'd been paid. There was also a formal appraisal he'd had done for his mother's rocker a year ago for insurance purposes, valuing it at $3,500 due to its age and craftsmanship. He'd also included a detailed list of his woodworking tools and their replacement cost, which he calculated at just over $15,000. Finally, he included the consignment agreement from the gallery for the 3 pieces, clearly stating their list price of $22,500. Ms. Devers reviewed the documents, her lips pursed in concentration. She did the math on her legal pad. So, by my calculation, she disposed of approximately $41,000 in tangible assets, not counting the sentimental value of your mother's chair, which is, of course, incalculable. Yes, ma'am, Wendell said quietly. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the pad. This is very strong, Mr. Miller. Very strong. Her attorney will likely argue that you two are of different means. She has a higher salary, you have your custodian's income, and that she was simply taking her share. But this, she gestured to the pile of evidence, this changes the narrative. This isn't about assets. This is about cruelty. This is punitive. And we can use that. She paused, her sharp eyes fixing on him. Now, you've been very organized, very methodical. Is there anything else? You've been holding on to that envelope since we started. What's in it? Wendell looked down at the plain white envelope he'd been clutching. It was the last piece of the puzzle. I don't know, he admitted. She left it for me. I haven't opened it. Why not? I don't know, a feeling, I guess. It felt like the last move in a game I didn't know we were playing. I wanted to open it with someone who understood the rules. Ms. Devers gave him a small, appreciative smile. Wise man, let's see what it is. With his lawyer watching, Wendell carefully slid his finger under the flap and tore open the envelope. His hands were surprisingly steady. He pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter from Claudette. It wasn't a note of apology or explanation. It was a formal, legal document, a letter from her attorney. He read it aloud, his voice flat. Dear Mr. Miller, please be advised that I have been retained by Claudette Miller in the matter of her divorce from you. My client has vacated the marital residence at 452 B West Boulevard. She has secured assets she believes constitute her fair share of the marital estate. Please find enclosed a preliminary financial disclosure form. You are required by law to complete this and return it to my office within 30 days, detailing all your income and assets. Failure to comply will result in a motion to compel. He stopped reading. It was exactly what he expected. A cold, arrogant opening salvo. But there was nothing enclosed. The envelope was empty except for the letter. "There's no form," Wendell said, confused. "Of course not," Ms. Devers said with a dry chuckle. "She didn't include it because she thinks you have nothing to declare. Your $34,000 salary, a car with nearly 200,000 miles, and a checking account with a few $100s in it?" "About that," Wendell said. "She doesn't know, does she?" Ms. Devers asked, her eyes gleaming. "Know what?" Suddenly Wendell remembered. The envelope wasn't from Claudette. It had been on the counter, yes, but he had assumed. He remembered the mail slot. He remembered the postman usually came around noon. He had come home at 5 a.m. This envelope had been sitting there since the day before she left. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his worn leather wallet. From a hidden flap, he extracted another envelope, slightly crumpled, that had arrived 2 days before Claudette left. It was from a company called Artisan Collective, a high-end furniture buyer based in Asheville that he'd been in talks with for months. He had been waiting for the right moment to tell Claudette, the moment he could present it as a triumph. That moment never came. He handed the new envelope to Ms. Devers. "This is what she doesn't know about." She opened it. This one contained a multi-page document. She read the first page, then the second. Her eyes widened. She looked up at Wendell, then back at the document, then back at Wendell. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked, her voice hushed. "It's an annual contract," Wendell said. "They want to buy everything I can make. They saw my work at a smaller show last year. They want to be my exclusive distributor." "Wendell?" Ms. Devers said, her voice filled with a new level of respect. She tapped a figure on the page with her pen. "This contract guarantees you a minimum of $126,000 a year." And there it was, the final piece. The one thing of immense value that Claudette, in her blind arrogance, had not and could not have taken, because it wasn't a physical object. It was a testament to his skill, his dedication, his art. It was the very thing she had dismissed as a little wood hobby. Ms. Devers leaned back, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Oh, she made a critical mistake," she said softly. "She thought she was playing checkers, and you, Mr. Miller, are about to play chess." The strike was not a loud, crashing event. It was a quiet, precise, and devastatingly effective countermove, executed with the cold, methodical calm that had become Wendell's shield. The trigger came 2 weeks later, exactly as Ms. Devers had predicted. A certified letter arrived at the duplex, which Wendell was now slowly beginning to reclaim. It was from Claudette's attorney, a man named Marcus Thorne, from a prestigious firm whose glass tower dominated the Charlotte skyline. The letter was dripping with condescension. It noted Wendell's failure to return the financial disclosure, the one they had never sent, and formally demanded it within 5 business days. It included a list of marital assets Claudette was claiming, which included 75% of the value of the duplex, her full pension, and, most audaciously, a demand for spousal support from him, citing the disparity in their future earning potential now that she was on a partner track. Wendell read the letter, a 3-page document printed on expensive heavyweight bond paper that probably cost more than his lunch, and felt nothing but a quiet resolve. He scanned it and emailed it to Ms. Devers with a simple subject line: "It's time." Ms. Devers' response was immediate. "I'll have the package ready by end of day. The courier is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow." The package was a work of legal art. It wasn't a letter in response. It was a formal filing with the Mecklenburg County Family Court, a copy of which would be delivered by courier to the offices of Thorne and Associates. Ms. Devers walked Wendell through the final version over the phone. "The core of our filing," she explained, "is a motion for an expedited hearing on the dissipation of marital assets and a petition for exclusive possession of potential future earnings. It sounds complicated, but it's simple. We're telling the judge that your wife maliciously destroyed or disposed of marital property, and in doing so, has forfeited her right to any share of the business she tried to sabotage." The filing was a masterpiece of evidence-based warfare. First, there was the motion itself, a dry but damning narrative of Claudette's actions, framed not as a spurned wife's anger, but as a calculated financial maneuver designed to defraud Wendell of his share of the marital estate. Then came the exhibits, each one a nail in the coffin of Claudette's case. Exhibit A, the appraisal of lost assets. This was a notarized, itemized list of everything she had taken and disposed of. It listed his complete set of workshop tools, with replacement costs sourced from woodworking catalogs totaling $15,380. It listed the 3 gallery pieces, with a copy of the consignment agreement, for $22,500. It listed his mother's antique rocking chair, with the formal appraisal, for $3,500. The grand total at the bottom of the page was a stark and unforgiving $41,380. Exhibit B, the confession. This was a high-resolution color copy of the Goodwill donation receipt. Claudette's neat signature was clearly visible at the bottom, next to the absurdly low valuation of $200. Ms. Devers had even highlighted the discrepancy between the declared value and the appraised value in Exhibit A, Exhibit C, the video evidence, the USB drive containing the neighbor's doorbell footage. The court filing included a typed transcript of the video's key moments, time-stamped to the second. 6:02 a.m., unmarked truck arrives. 6:05 a.m., Claudette Miller and Renee Scott are observed directing movers. 6:34 a.m., a Powermatic PM1000. Table saw, approximate value $2,200, is loaded onto the truck. 6:47 a.m., an antique cherry wood rocking chair is loaded onto the truck. Exhibit D, the secret weapon. This was the coup de grace. It was a copy of the signed, dated, and legally binding contract from the Artisan Collective for $126,000. Ms. Devers had attached a sworn affidavit from Wendell, stating that this contract was the direct result of the work he produced using the very tools that Claudette had disposed of. The affidavit concluded with a simple, devastating sentence. "My wife's actions were a deliberate attempt to destroy my ability to fulfill this contract and earn a living from my craft, which she consistently belittled as a little wood hobby." He had repeated her own words back to her, now entered into the public record. The next morning, at precisely 9 a.m., a legal courier on a bicycle, wearing a bright yellow uniform, pulled up outside the gleaming glass and steel entrance of the Thorne and Associates building in uptown Charlotte. He handed a thick, professionally bound document to the unimpressed receptionist on the 45th floor. The reaction was not immediate, but when it came, it was seismic. The first sign of impact was an email from Marcus Thorne to Ms. Devers at 11:15 a.m. The tone was dramatically different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a strained, lawyerly attempt at conciliation. "Ms. Devers, I am in receipt of your client's filing. I believe there may have been a significant misunderstanding. Perhaps we can discuss this matter before proceeding further in court." Ms. Devers's reply was a single sentence. "My client prefers to let the evidence speak for itself in front of a judge." The real explosion happened at 2:30 p.m. That's when Claudette's world began to unravel. Wendell's phone, which had been silent for 2 weeks, suddenly lit up with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. It was Renee, her voice a frantic, high-pitched squeal. "Wendell, what did you do? What did you do? Claudette's lawyer just called me. He said I'm named in a lawsuit for helping her move. You have to call this off. This could ruin my career. Claudette said it was just junk. She said you wouldn't care." An hour later, Claudette herself began to call. The first call he missed. The second, third, and fourth he ignored. He sat on the floor of his empty living room, listening to the voicemails as they came in, one after another. A real-time record of a person's world collapsing under the weight of her own actions. The first voicemail was pure anger. "Wendell, what the hell is this? Marcus just read me your filing. $126,000? You've been lying to me this whole time, hiding money, and suing me over that old junk in the garage? You call me back right now." The second was denial and justification. Those tools were old, and that contract is marital property, you know. You can't just keep that for yourself. I'm entitled to half of that. You owe me. I supported you in your stupid hobby for years. The third was when the panic began to set in. Her voice was higher, less steady. $41,000? Where did you get that number? It wasn't worth that. It was just stuff. And now Marcus is talking about sanctions, about me having to pay your legal fees. Wendell, you can't do this. We were married for 8 years. The final voicemail, left just before 5 p.m., was just a sound. It was the sound of Claudette crying, not tears of remorse, but tears of terrified self-pity. It was the sound of a woman who had staked everything on a bet that her husband was small and had just discovered, in the most public and humiliating way possible, how catastrophically she had miscalculated. Wendell listened to the last message, then deleted them all. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a profound and weary sadness. He had won, but he had lost his life to get here. He stood up, the joints in his back popping, and walked into the empty space that used to be his workshop. He had work to do. He had a new life to build, from scratch. The consequences cascaded, not like a sudden flood, but like a slow, steady, and merciless tide, pulling Claudette further and further from the shores of the life she had so desperately craved. The downfall was not a single event, but a series of enumerated, legally documented humiliations. First came the legal consequences. The expedited hearing was scheduled before a no-nonsense family court judge, a woman known for her meticulous reading of filings and her intolerance for courtroom theatrics. Claudette and her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, arrived looking polished and confident. Claudette in an $8,700 Armani suit she'd bought for the occasion. Wendell arrived with Ms. Devers, wearing a simple, clean suit he'd bought at Kohl's for $220. He didn't need an expensive suit. He had the evidence. The judge spent less than 10 minutes on pleasantries before getting to the heart of the matter. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice sharp as she looked over her glasses at Claudette's attorney, "I have read your client's initial claim and I have read Mr. Miller's response. And frankly, I am struggling to reconcile the two. Can you please explain to me why your client believed it was appropriate to dispose of what appears to be over $40,000 in marital assets at a charity donation center and then declare their value at $200? Marcus Thorne, now billing Claudette at a frantic $1,200 per hour, began to stammer about emotional distress and misunderstanding the value of niche collectibles. The judge cut him off. "Counsel, save the spin. What I see here is a clear-cut case of dissipation of assets in bad faith. It is one of the most egregious examples I have seen in my 15 years on this bench." She turned her stern gaze on Claudette, whose confident posture had begun to sag. "Ms. Miller, did you or did you not sign this goodwill receipt?" "Yes, Your Honor, but—" No buts, the judge snapped. You signed it. You directed the disposal of these assets, including an irreplaceable family heirloom and the very tools your husband requires for his profession. A profession, I might add, which you seem to have willfully underestimated. The ruling was swift and brutal. The judge ordered Claudette to immediately reimburse Wendell for 100% of the appraised value of the destroyed property, $41,380. Furthermore, she was ordered to pay for all of Wendell's legal fees, which had climbed to $12,500. The total judgment against her was a staggering $53,880 due within 90 days. Next came the financial consequences, which were even more devastating. Marcus Thorne, trying to salvage something for his client, made a desperate play for the Artisan Collective contract. Your Honor, the $126,000 contract is clearly a marital asset. We ask that it be divided equally as is standard. Ms. Devers stood up, calm and collected. Your Honor, we argue that this is a unique situation. My client's ability to earn this money is predicated on his skill and his tools. The defendant, Ms. Miller, made a deliberate and malicious attempt to destroy his ability to perform this contract by disposing of those tools. To award her a share of the income she actively tried to prevent would be rewarding bad faith. We petition that the full value and future earnings from this contract and all subsequent contracts related to his woodworking be assigned to Mr. Miller as his sole and separate property. The judge considered this for a long moment. She looked at the goodwill receipt, then at the video transcript, then at the contract. The court agrees, she said finally. Ms. Miller's actions severed her claim to the fruits of the labor she sought to undermine. The earnings from Mr. Miller's woodworking business are hereby declared his separate property. A gasp was audible from Claudette's side of the courtroom. The $126,000, the real money she had craved, had vanished before her eyes. Awarded entirely to the man whose life she had tried to dismantle. Then came the social and familial fallout. Renee, her sister and accomplice, was not held legally liable for the judgment, but she was named in the court filings as a participant. Her employer, a conservative financial institution, got wind of it. She was called into a meeting with HR and given a formal reprimand for conduct unbecoming of a senior associate. The whispers in the office and the stain on her reputation were immediate. The next time Claudette called her, begging for a loan to help pay the judgment, Renee's response was cold. You did this to yourself, Claudette. You and your greed. Don't drag me down with you. The sisters, once inseparable conspirators, stopped speaking. Finally, the beautiful mirage of her new life in South Park evaporated. The $680,000 condo, which she had barely had time to furnish, was now an anchor dragging her to the bottom. With a $53,880 judgment, her own legal bills approaching $30,000, and no hope of touching Wendell's new income, she had no choice. She was forced to sell the condo in a hurry, taking a loss of over $25,000 after closing costs and realtor fees. The last Wendell heard, through a mutual acquaintance, was that Claudette had moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment complex off Independence Boulevard, a place with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. The concierge, the pool, the gym, the entire package she had sacrificed her marriage for, was gone. She was left with a mountain of debt, a tarnished professional reputation, and the bitter taste of a life she had almost grasped, only to have it slip through her fingers as a direct consequence of her own cruelty. She had wanted what was real, and in the end, she was left with the most real things of all, consequences and regret. 1 year later. The duplex on West Boulevard was unrecognizable. The transformation had been slow, methodical, and deeply personal. Wendell had become a master of reclamation, not just of wood, but of his own life. He had started with the floors. He'd rented a heavy-duty sander for $70 a day and spent a week on his hands and knees, stripping away the old, scratched varnish, revealing the beautiful, pale oak hidden underneath. He stained it a warm, rich brown, the color of dark honey, and sealed it with 3 coats of polyurethane until it shone with a soft, resilient light. He painted the walls a gentle, calming gray. He replaced the cheap, hollow-core doors with solid 5-panel ones he built himself. The silence of the house, which had once been a haunting echo of his loss, was now a peaceful quiet, filled only by the sounds of his own work. The whisper of a handplane, the rhythmic tap of a chisel, the soft scratch of sandpaper on wood. He had quit his job as a custodian 6 months ago. The Artisan Collective contract had been even more successful than predicted. They loved his work, his reliability, his quiet professionalism. They had already renewed his contract for the following year, increasing the minimum guarantee to $175,000. He had hired a part-time accountant to manage the books and was looking for a larger workshop space downtown. His home was now his showroom. The living room was furnished with a stunning sofa he'd designed and had upholstered, its frame made of exposed maple. The walnut coffee table was back, not the original, but a new one, even more beautiful, its grain flowing like water. In the dining room stood a table made from a single slab of reclaimed sycamore, surrounded by 6 elegant, hand-carved chairs. Each piece was a testament to his skill, a quiet declaration of his worth. This afternoon he was on his front porch. The September sun was warm on his face, illuminating the deep brown of his skin as he worked. He was not sanding or cutting. He was weaving. In his hands were long, thin strips of cane, which he was meticulously weaving into the seat of a new rocking chair. The frame, made of cherry wood just like his mother's, sat beside him, its curves smooth and perfect. He had spent over 100 hours on it, getting every detail just right. It was not a replacement for what he had lost. That was impossible. It was a continuation. It was an act of creation in the face of destruction. He had seen Claudette once. About a month ago, he'd been picking up supplies at the lumber yard when he saw her walk by on the other side of the street. She looked smaller, her expensive clothes replaced by a simple dress that didn't fit quite right. The confident, ambitious stride was gone, replaced by a tired shuffle. She didn't see him. He felt a brief pang, not of pity, but of a distant, sorrowful recognition of the waste of it all. He had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his. Forgiveness was just another tool to lighten his own load, to let go of the dead weight of anger so he could build something new. He finished weaving the last strip of cane, trimmed the end, and tucked it neatly away. He stood up and fitted the newly woven seat into the cherry wood frame. It was a perfect fit. He ran his hand over the curved back of the rocker, feeling the life in the wood. Claudette had told him to keep his little wood hobby because she was taking what's real. He finally understood how wrong she was. She thought what was real were the things you could buy, the assets you could list on a disclosure form, the $680,000 condo, the $8,700 suit, the junior partnership. She had taken all of that, or tried to, and it had all turned to dust in her hands. He, on the other hand, had kept what was truly real. The skill in his hands, passed down from his grandfather, the integrity of his character, which had guided him to build rather than break, to create rather than destroy. The peace of a quiet home, filled with things made with love and intention. The profound satisfaction of taking something raw and broken and making it whole and beautiful again. That was real wealth. That was the kind of value you couldn't put a price tag on, and the kind no one could ever take away. He carefully carried the new rocker to the corner of the porch, to the exact spot where his mother's chair had sat for so many years. The late afternoon sun cast its long shadow across the newly refinished porch boards. He sat down, the chair giving a gentle creak, a sound like a welcoming sigh. He began to rock, a slow, steady rhythm, back and forth, as the sun began to set. He was home. What do you think is the truest measure of a person's wealth? Is it what they own or who they are? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from the Love Beyond Pride community. For most of us, life is a journey of discovering what truly matters. Wendell's journey was harder than most, but through it, he found a strength he never knew he had. He learned that sometimes the most valuable things in our lives aren't things at all. They are the skills we cultivate, the integrity we maintain, and the peace we build for ourselves, one patient, careful step at a time. The world may try to tell you what has value, but only you can decide what is truly priceless.